Tonight, we dissect and analyze the vice presidential debate, likely the last debate of the 2024 election cycle. In just 10 seconds, Ohio Senator JD Vance, the running mate of Donald Trump, revealed his political strategy, softening his image, appealing to common ground, and evading the hard truths that haunt his candidacy. He claimed his working class roots, echoing Kamala Harris's narrative, while artfully sidestepping contentious issues like abortion and the military service claims of his opponent, Tim Walz. But as Vance aimed for moderation, Walz struggled to engage, often appearing unprepared to counter Vance's slippery answers and the GOP's outrageous claims. Tonight, we're going to explore why this debate didn't just illuminate the candidates' strategies, but also highlighted the pitfalls of playing it too safe in today's heated political arena. Join us tonight as we unravel the implications of this debate for Kamala Harris's campaign, Donald Trump's campaign, the state of the Democratic Party, the state of the Republican Party, and the challenges that lie ahead in this unprecedented election cycle. Tonight, I'm so glad to be joined by Professor Fred Cook of Howard University School of Law, adjunct professor. Thank you for being back on the show, Professor.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy to be back. Happy to be anywhere.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute since Professor Cook has been on. I'm so glad to have him on. And then we've got Josh Lewis, of course, who's a friend to the podcast, this host of the Saving Elephants podcast. We have Mr. Stephen Foster, one of the leading journalists of whattheyshouldsay.org. Happy to have him. And then we're going to be joined a little bit later by Professor Foster, his brother, who is a professor of public policy at Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama, and also a contributing journalist to whattheyshouldsay.org, and also Nate Honore, who is a regular on the show. Someone who is a astute political mind, a great person to have. And I'm so glad to have you gentlemen on. In light of this past Tuesday night's vice presidential debate, the first thing that stood out to me when the debate started was that the moderators, of course, asked the candidates about the ongoing situation in terms of Israel retaliating against Iran. Governor Walz had the opening question. He had the first response, and he alluded to the fact that Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, his two secretaries of defense, his national security advisors, have warned the American public that Donald Trump is an unstable leader, that he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, I'm bringing that up because there's a lot of talk among the political punditry that Governor Walz had a slow start to this debate. I took a different opinion. I think that he came out swinging immediately. As cordial as the conversation seemed to be between the two gentlemen, there were some jabs given. And I think that just because it wasn't given in the usual Trumpian way with a zinger that was memorable, I do think that it was something that was quite remarkable. It made me think back to Hillary Clinton's campaign when she had the campaign commercial of all of the Republican national security advisors, members of the military, generals, in a campaign ad warning the American public against a potential Donald Trump presidency. Here we are 8 years removed from that, and we've seen already what a Donald Trump presidency could look like. I want to get your thoughts about how the debate unfolded at the very beginning, gentlemen.
You know, I think, Mike, kind of what you're saying there, maybe both things could be true simultaneously, that being Walz did come out swinging. And I think that might explain in part why he didn't start off as strong as he did. It seemed to me that Walz had a better night the more the night went on. He was a little uncomfortable saying a lot, misquoting, saying some things and then kind of doubting himself, kind of like I'm doing now. But as the night went on, he got better. And I really think he realized very early on, wait a minute, this is not the JD Vance I was prepped to debate with. This is the kinder, gentler JD Vance. And I think that kind of threw him off his game at first. And so he comes out swinging, and then he had to throttle back a little bit. And I'm wondering if that's why we saw him with some missteps there toward the beginning.
Yeah, I kind of think that Governor Walz, in the beginning, seemed to want to, and I think I heard somebody on TV say this, he wanted to make sure we knew he'd read the briefing book. So he knew he wanted to touch all the points that he was prepped to say. But I do think, to use a bad metaphor from boxing, is that different styles make fights. And I think that the fight he came to have, he wasn't able to have, okay? Because JD Vance was a different JD Vance than maybe he thought he was going to get. And I think JD Vance did a good job of being the facile and shallow human being that he is. And it didn't give Governor Walz, I think, the chance to attack the lunatic JD Vance that he thought he was going to get. And so a lot of people thought JD Vance looked better, but it was because he was very superficial and he did the I'm a smart guy and I can sound reasonable thing. But most everything he said was nonsensical. It's like, so I think that Walz did a good job. I think he did the primary mission. Don't screw up really badly. He didn't do that. And I do think that he got a little bit more comfortable with who he was actually debating as opposed to who he came to debate as the debate went on.
Well, I actually think that Vance was better prepped for the event. I think he was better prepped for the event, and I think Vance was underrated going in to this format anyway. I mean, he's been interviewed countless times when he was pushing his book, The Hillbilly Elegy, before he was even in politics, and he's just good. From a smooth standpoint, he's smooth. Now, in this format, he wasn't fact checked or wasn't supposed to be fact checked, and that gave him a free for all. that played into his tendency for mendacity. Let's put it that way. But I think Vance started out introducing himself, which is something that it took the Governor Walz, a long time to do. And I think Walz would have been better served had he been advised to, no matter what he is asked, always remind people how this election is about the survival of democracy. Based on things that Trump and Vance have said and done. He should have always been prepared to say that, and then, or say something to that effect, and then go answer the question. But that should have been his theme. He should have been pounding that from the beginning. And he played this as if it was a normal debate in a normal election. And but you could sense the tension that he knows that democracy is at stake. So he knows that he had a big weight on his shoulders coming in, and the nervousness was evident early in the debate. And I don't think he ever really got over it. In fact, he got flustered in that one question relative to Tiananmen Square, which he should have been totally prepared for. But there was so many openings. You never heard anything about Trump being a criminal. You never heard anything about Trump being a rapist. An adjudicated rapist, a fraud. That stuff should have been pounded, and I just think that he let the Trump Vance ticket off the hook. He got his licks in at the end when they asked him questions relative to the survival of democracy. Finally, but that should have been his theme, no matter what they asked him, in my opinion.
I wanted to bring up the fact that you had, alluded to the fact that democracy should have been the central focus of the debate. I think that CBS kind of characterized the topics based on what polls show are the most prominent issues among voters. And I think that voters have become so numb to hearing that democracy is at stake that now they're just thinking about, what's more tangible for me? The economy, the price of groceries, the price of gas, the price of living. housing affordability. They're focused on it seems like they're focused on more temporal now issues than democracy. And I'm wondering if the media, by kind of catering to that kind of mindset, is allowing the focus to shift gradually from democracy to these regular issues, so that the debate, like we saw, which, you know, if I came from Mars and landed on planet Earth on this past Tuesday night, I would think JD Vance was running with Mitt Romney. And I would think this was like a regular election in 2004, Bush versus Kerry or something. I wouldn't think that, you know, there was ever a January 6th. I wouldn't think that there was ever an attempt to overturn the past election, only because of how little attention, to your point, Mr. Foster, went into those things. And I'm wondering if the media is complicit by characterizing and organizing its debate schedule accordingly. Another issue, or another decision that CBS made, like you pointed out, was not to fact check. And Josh, last time I was on your show, that was one of the key topics we were discussing. What's the role of the moderator?
That was a long topic we were discussing.
should the moderator just pose questions, or should the moderator take a more active role and play the role of referee and make sure that both candidates are checked in real time? And, you know, we had I think a healthy exchange on that show. But, you know, that's something that folks to this day, I mean, the media is struggling in the era of Trump as to what role it should play in things that we used to take for granted. You know, I go back to 2012, like I did on your show, Josh, and I remember Candy Crawley stopped Mitt Romney in real time. And, you know, the issue at that debate was whether Obama took a certain period of time to call the Benghazi attack an attack on a terrorist attack and an act of terror. And a lot of Republicans got upset. They lost their minds over that. They said that Candy Crawley was playing favorites, that, you know, there was even an allegation that the questions were given to Obama before, and I haven't seen any evidence of, I haven't seen any evidence of that. But those are, I mean, these are the concerns that folks have about, you know, politics in the age of Trump moving forward. I know Trump said if he loses, he's not running again, but I'm wondering if this is forever changed.
Oh, yeah, it's changed. I mean, I think the media has fundamentally defaulted on a lot of its mission, because it's evolved, not because of Trump, but it has evolved from a journalism-based enterprise to a business enterprise. And what they're protecting are their business interests as opposed to focusing on journalism. And, you know, I'm not completely crazy. I mean, I know you got to make money because you can't keep the lights on if you don't do that. But I think that when you look at who's running these networks, who's making the key decisions in these media, in the mainstream media kind of things, they aren't fundamentally journalists. They're business people. They're figuring out the best way to crank the most profit per unit of whatever for their enterprise. And that doesn't make them evil, and it doesn't mean they got to burn in hell. But journalism isn't paramount, and so it's easier for them to say, well, you know, our job really isn't to take sides, because then in a country that's got a significant division, there's a bunch of people who won't like us and won't watch our station or our programs and buy our soap, and we can't do that. That doesn't work for us, because there's somebody who will appeal to that group. So I think that there has been a sort of an across the board default and a reticence to do what journalists do, to ask people the hard questions. Like, why are you lying about that? You know, I mean, it's almost as simple as that, but they can't do it anymore because the business of journalism has become a true business, much more of a business than not, in terms of aspirationally. So, you know, I think it's different, and it's not likely to go back to being, you know, Edward R. Murrow or Walter Cronkite or any of those old guys that none of you young people know who I'm talking about, but those guys existed at one time. I said young people, Mr. Foster, young people. So those guys existed at one point, but that's just not who is doing television or media anymore.
But I think that does speak somewhat to the heart of the problem. I mean, we know that we live in a deeply polarized partisan era. We can imagine, for instance, if this debate had taken place with Fox News pundits. I don't think many Democrats would be terribly happy if during the entire evening the moderators were consistently fact-checking both candidates. Even if they were doing it in some sort of a bipartisan manner, it'd be really hard to imagine that's truly what's going on here. I think that, and Mike, I don't want to open the whole can of worms where we're going to re-adjudicate everything we did on my program, but I'll just, and you know my thoughts on this. I am not hard-nosed in that a moderator or a journalist, I guess, Fred, as you're mentioning, has no place to question the veracity of a statement in a debate. But the problem is, the purpose of the debate is that our nation is in dispute about facts and truth and direction and how we should be going. And one of the ways you can adjudicate that in a fair and free manner is for the moderator to simply make sure both opponents in the debate adhere to the rules, such as time constraints, such as not talking over each other, such as giving an individual an opportunity to respond to his opponent's charges. It is, in my view, it's the job of the opponent in the debate to fact check in real time. And I say this with an awareness that this can be very frustrating, but I think there is a real advantage to giving to putting faith in the American people, that if a politician is going to get up there and just lie through their teeth and their opponent does not effectively fact check them in real time, that we Americans do have the capacity to check our own facts. And if we're not doing that, it's probably because we don't really want to know the facts.
Well, I think fundamentally, part of why we debate in the first place is to say that we can draw different conclusions, we can have different opinions about where this country needs to go, but we don't get to draw from different facts, right? So, especially when you're a journalist, when your interest is supposed to be in what's true and what's not, when you have a candidate get on stage and say, Democrats are killing babies after they're born, as a journalist, your responsibility isn't to say, Democrats, are you killing babies after they're born? Your job is to say, killing babies after they're born is illegal in all 50 states. And I think part of the reason we got that fact-checking in the first debate in the first place, partially because, to be very clear, ABC did not announce ahead of time they would be fact-checking, is because Democrats did what Republicans have been doing for the past 40 years, which is work the referees a bit, right? Like when you watch a football game and the quarterback gets hit a few times and doesn't get the flag he wants, he gets up and starts complaining to the referee because that makes the referee pay more attention. So the next time the quarterback takes a hit that looks a little questionable, that yellow flag comes flying onto the field. In the lead up to the debate, Democrats did a lot of talking and complaining about how the media sane-washed Trump, about how he would blather incoherently for 2 hours about Hannibal Lecter and electric sharks, and then in write-ups about what he said, you would get some perfectly anodyne quote about tax policy. So when you have that conversation about sane-washing, then all eyes are on the media during this debate. When Trump says the same lie about abortion that he repeated in the first debate, there was that preparation to say, no, that's not the truth. When Trump repeated lies about Haitian immigrants in Springfield eating people's pets, there were the journalists to say, no, that's not the truth. Let's bring this discussion back to reality. I think to that point, CBS announcing in advance that they wouldn't fact check is partially because Democrats didn't do that same working of the refs, but it did particularly affect Governor Walz because he's someone who is very open about the fact that he's not comfortable in a debating format, and it very much assisted Senator Vance because, he is that, smooth Harvard-trained debater who was much more able to come off as, normal and genteel as opposed to how Trump came off as incredibly extreme during his debate.
Foreign policy started off the entire debate, and one of the things that stood out to me was the echoing of the closing argument of Trump's statement at the presidential debate a few weeks ago, which was, if Kamala Harris has been in office, for 3.5 years, why hasn't XYZ been accomplished yet? And he kind of put, why is Iran closer to obtaining a nuclear weapon in that framework? Now, of course, Walz had alluded to the fact that Trump has removed the United States from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, which contributed to that. Walz fires back by saying, well, it happened on their watch. October the 7th happened on their watch. The instability that we're seeing right now between Hamas and Israel is happening on the Biden-Harris administration's watch. What did you guys think about that position? Was it effective? was that resonate with folks who, are looking for change in this election? I've always said, there's certain elections where you can see changes the theme. 1976 was a change election. 92 was a change election. 2008 was a change election. 2020 was a change election. And I think this year, the more, this year progresses, the more it's shaping up to be a change election as well.
Yeah, I'm not clear on the question, Mike. I heard you, but I'm just not understand. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. If you're asking about the zeitgeist or the ethos of this whole election as a change election or not.
How did you feel about Vance's? Sorry. How did you feel about this argument that the instability of the Hamas-Israel situation took place under the Biden-Harris administration? And how does that resonate with folks in the change atmosphere?
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, there are some disadvantages to incumbency, because every election has either an incumbent or an incumbent, at least an incumbent party that was in power, and so it's always going to be the incumbent party, much less an incumbent member of the ticket, is going to be on the defensive for whatever is happening right now. I mean, this is the way it is. But I think the moderators did catch the fact that the Trump administration got a ran out of the JCPOA and put them on the fast track to perhaps gaining nuclear weapons. And I think that was the moderator, as I recall, more than it was Governor Walz. And I don't want to be too hard on Governor Walz, but that was something that, that was another lost opportunity to me. I mean, he should have pounded on that, and the fact that our coalitions of alliances, were on the verge of crumbling under Trump. I mean, I don't remember hearing much about what's going on in Ukraine. I don't, that should have been something that they should have been forced to be on the defensive about. And even Vance's position, he's got an isolationist position on everything. He doesn't want to help allies anywhere. Even his answer relative to Israel was, well, we'll let Israel, to do what it does. I mean, do what it needs to do, instead of, you would think that somebody from a right-wing foreign policy perspective would have a robust, answer about, the United States' role in defending and helping Israel defend itself. So I mean, I just think, I just think that the governor let them off the hook again on this as well.
Well, part of it is that, in part owing to the conditions that Trump inherited when he was president. ISIS, when he became president, in the waning days of the Obama administration, ISIS was on the back foot. No one was really worried about China. Yes, there was the conflict in Syria that got so chaotic that no one knew who they were fighting for or whose side they were on anymore. But Trump has been able to make himself seem like he's the peace candidate, because there were not these new engagements. There weren't these million little hotspots that were popping up during his presidency. That isn't to say that Trump is peaceful or anti-war. I remember that one of the first major controversies of his administration was that botched military raid in Niger, where he said some very insensitive remarks to a soldier's widow, and then his chief of staff lied on a sitting congressman when she said that Trump had made those insensitive remarks. I remember that Trump dropped more bombs on Afghanistan in 4 years than Obama did in 8, loosened rules of engagement, and then cut back on reporting so that there was less reporting around civilian deaths. But because those are not issues that make their way into the top of the news hour or the top of the news pages or the top of people's social media feeds, unless you're insanely plugged into defense policy, Trump is able to pass himself off as the defense candidate. Biden, by virtue of his very long record in public service, has plenty of misses as it relates to foreign policy. Biden did support invading Afghanistan. He did support the war in Iraq, which Trump supported as well, but Trump was able to say, no, I didn't support it, and everyone believed him in 2016. And the fact that now there is this hotspot in the Middle East, there is this disaster in Gaza that's now expanded to another disaster in Lebanon, that it's happened on Joe Biden's watch when he said, I'm the foreign policy expert and I'm going to be the one who is going to make our world safe and peaceful. People remember that we didn't have to worry about constantly coming close to being a hair trigger away from World War III during the Trump years, even if, and they've forgotten that Trump is someone who conducted foreign policy by tweet. He fired his Secretary of State via tweet. He would have arguments with other dictators on Twitter, but no one remembers that, partially because Democrats just haven't reminded people. And like what you said, it was a missed opportunity for Walz. In their first debate, Harris pounded on the fact that Trump is extreme, right? But with this very collegial vice presidential debate, there was that missed opportunity to connect Vance to Trump's extremists and highlight the fact that highlight the same thing that Walz highlighted back in July when he became the contender for running mate, which is that Trump is extreme, Vance is weird. And by talking about I agree on this and we agree on that, that was a missed opportunity to connect the two of them and to make people remember that the Trump days were not some golden days of golden era of peace and safety. They were similarly, if not more, chaotic because we never knew what Trump was going to do in a crisis.
Well, I think that's right. I think that it ties back to what we were talking about before this. It's fundamentally because Trump and Vance don't tell the truth. Vance said the other day that at the debate that the reason the world was safer is because people were afraid, foreign leaders were afraid to do anything because Donald Trump would punish them, which is really factually untrue. It's insane to say. He was an erratic person who was not trusted by other foreign leaders. Mr. Biden put together a coalition of foreign leaders that Donald Trump never could have done because there was not trust in the person that there is apparently in Joe Biden. But you're right, because the world didn't largely blow up, and most presidents don't control that. You deal with the cards that you get dealt, and you don't know what's going to happen. And that's why it's important that somebody like Donald Trump not be sitting in the chair when something important happens and a rational, competent human being has to respond to it. But that's not the way most people in the public see it. We are disconnected in large part from the consequences of military action because such a small percentage of the American population has a direct connection to military action. And so people just sort of don't want to be bothered with it. It's not their problem. And it's not, I don't fault people, but until it's in your living room, until it's at your kitchen table, you just don't think about it. And Mr. Trump made that happen. Most people didn't have to think about it. And so they see him as a guy who was good on foreign policy. It's just insanely inaccurate, but that's the way it is.
Oh, Professor, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Good to see you, and I apologize for being late. Technical issues persist. I think the biggest missed opportunity was just the basic debating skill of, regardless of what the moderator asks you, to pivot to your strengths, and to pivot to the lack of specificity on the part of the Trump-Vance ticket. Just two examples. If the subject is foreign policy, pivot to Ukraine. Talk about how the United States has supported Ukraine, strengthened NATO, expanded NATO, shipped arms without involving the United States directly, and frozen Putin's push to reconstruct the USSR, and then ask Vance, what would you do? What would President Trump do in the same situation about Ukraine specifically? You could pivot to healthcare. In the first presidential debate between Vice President Harris and former President Trump, the question about healthcare was never answered. Since 2015, Trump has been saying he wanted to end Obamacare. It's now 9 years later. What is the specific Trump alternative to Obamacare specifically? You've had 9 years to think about this. What is it? And those opportunities, being dependent on the moderator to draw the opponent into the crosshairs where they're weak, is, I think, just a strategic debating opportunity.
And Vance, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said that Trump strengthened the ACA, that Donald Trump strengthened the Affordable Care Act, which, I almost did a double take. And I said, I wanted to know where is this alternate reality? I want to go visit. Because, I remember when John McCain stood up, and it was a big surprise that he was the deciding vote on this thing. It was December of 2017 when he famously put his thumb down against the proposal to abolish the Affordable Care Act. I remember the town hall meetings that got out of hand when legislators on both parties, Republican legislators, went back and were shouted at, finding themselves in shouting matches with their constituents, and those are things that I think, got to pass. But one issue that seems to be such a hot topic this election is immigration. And both men seem to concede that both of them want the immigration situation resolved. Governor Walz said, I believe Senator Vance wants to do something about the border. Senator Vance responded in kind to Governor Walz. But on immigration, Vance, sidestepped when asked how Trump would carry out his mass deportation promise. And he repeatedly attacked the vice president, saying, I've been to the southern border more than our border czar, Kamala Harris, has been. Governor Walz, of course, reminded folks that there was a Republican written bill by James Langford of Oklahoma, someone he commended as someone who he could get along with in Congress. And he said that it was Trump's fault for tanking that bill twice. How do you think the issue of immigration came across on this debate stage to the American people?
Well, I think that one of Governor Walz's, just to kind of balance it out a little bit for him, I think one of his stronger moments was when he reminded people that Trump promised to build a big, beautiful wall, and only 2% of the wall was built, and that Mexico would pay for it, and Mexico didn't pay a dime for it. So just reminding the American public about the how incredible, literally incredible, Trump is, I think was a strong point. I think that the fact that the bill that Senator Langford pretty much authored got tanked by Trump is another good strong talking point relative to the immigration crisis. And he did a good job on that. So I think he blunted the immigration, vulnerability pretty well. I mean, I think he did that. I think he did that fairly well.
I don't think Walz had a bad response in immigration. But there are certain issues, and immigration is one of them, where to ask how did such and so do in this debate, both candidates are not starting on an even playing field here. I mean, you guys are welcome to disagree, but it is my observation that in the mind of the average American voter, immigration favors Republicans and abortion favors Democrats. And so it's difficult for either of them to tangle with those issues on an even playing field. I don't think Walz did anything to harm his position, but I don't think JD Vance needed to knock it out of the park to lend some sort of credibility to the idea that he represents the side that is really going to crack down on immigration, even if that's complete hogwash. I don't think Walz was ever really in a position to truly damage Vance.
Well, I think you're right about the sort of inherent imbalance. But I think for the first time in a very long time, Ms. Harris and other Democrats are actually grappling with the immigration issue in a substantive way that they have not heretofore. And I think this tanking of a bipartisan, for whatever use that word is, but of actual substantive legislation that would begin to substantively address immigration is important to hang around the neck of Trump and Vance and all the Republicans who supported it. Because for too long, Democrats pretended that immigration really wasn't the problem it was, and that they were just being mean to people who were trying to find their way in the world. It has real consequences. It has been a real problem, and I think they're beginning to grapple with it. I think, but I think it's such a hot button issue that Vance could say, as he did at the debate, that the reason you can't buy a home is because immigrants are buying houses, contributing to the housing crisis, which is absolute nonsense. No economist, no housing person in the country believes that, but it is visceral. People say, well, wait a minute, there's all these immigrants running around and I can't get a house and my rent is too high. And people sort of resonate with that on one level. And it takes a while to get people to think it through, to say, wait a minute, housing has been messed up for a long time. And immigrants at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale aren't taking middle-class houses from me because they can't afford them anyway. But it takes a while for people to think that through. So I think that Democrats have a lot of work to do in being perceived as being actually substantive on immigration and not saying some of the more left extreme things of, well, just let them all in and we'll sort it out later. Because I just don't think many people feel comfortable with that on a visceral level. And
well,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Fred. And just to be clear, while I do think Trump and Vance, in the mind of maybe the American people, have more credibility on the issue of immigration, that doesn't mean I think they do.
Oh, no,
I don't. No, and I don't think you're accusing me of that. I thought it was. I think it's important because I appreciate you mentioning Trump tanked, and that's Senator Langford's my senator, as an imperfect bill, but it was an effort at compromise, and it represented, I think, exactly how we get out of this mess, which is a consensus built across the parties. Let's find something we can all live with. And I heard somebody explain this one. I think it's so true that part of the complexity with immigration is it's not just left versus right. It's also elite versus populism. You kind of got four dimensions here, and we really need all four of those quadrants to come together to come to some sort of working compromise. Trump has strong rhetoric on immigration, but when he's in the White House, all he does is pass executive orders because he doesn't have the capacity to get anything through Congress, which means when someone else gets in the White House, such as Joe Biden, that's why we're in the current immigration issue we are now, because Trump never fixed it when he had the opportunity.
And I think politically, the opportunity for Democrats is to recast or redefine the issue of immigration as one of global competitiveness. How can we make America more economically competitive? How can we bring prices down in America, and point to the ways in which immigration helps America's position on those issues? and then cast the Republicans' issue as one of simply divisiveness. You can look at the record and see that both the Democrats and the Republicans have failed in terms of the border because the issue is being kept alive simply to divide Americans from each other and to distract their attention to nameless faceless immigrants who Trump casts as animals. And that is a tactic to divide Americans from each other. So I think to the extent that the Democrats run from the issue as opposed to redefine it, it puts them on the defensive as opposed to allowing them to recast and reframe the issue in a way that works for them politically.
You know, I'll have to disagree with Josh a little bit on, he said something to the effect that Walz was never really in a position to damage Vance on immigration because of the, I guess, inherent advantage that Republicans generally have in the minds of the public. But, you know, again, this was a missed opportunity because there was a big wide opening that Vance himself gave, you know, when he said that he made up stories, you know, for, you know, like this dog and cat story in Springfield. That was a big wide opening to remind people that these people are not credible. You know, I mean, you know, that was never brought up. That was a big vulnerability that was never pounced on. I mean, you know, Vance admitted that he made up stories, you know, to get the media's attention on this issue, and that dog and cat story has been falsified by all the you know, the local Springfield, Ohio, you know, the mayor and everybody, the city manager, the governor of Ohio. I mean, this was a big vulnerability that you know, but this amiable nature of the debate, you know, I mean, you know, just a bunch of missed opportunities again, and that was one of them.
Actually, well, immigration is a very interesting issue when we look at the partisanship of it, because after they lost in 2012, when Obama performed so well with Hispanics, Republicans were like, maybe we need to moderate ourselves on immigration, which is why we got that big push for immigration reform during Obama's second term. And that turned out to be completely misaligned with the grassroots, which is what allowed for Trump's rise in 2016. But then 4 years ago, the winning message for Biden on immigration was a kinder, gentler, fairer immigration system, which is why up until fairly recently, the overwhelming majority of Americans thought immigration should be maintained at current levels or even slightly increased. It's why most Americans even now still think immigration is a net positive for the economy. But what people don't like is images of a southern border in disarray. They don't like hearing stories of fentanyl being trafficked in and young people dying, which, speaking of missed opportunities, most of the fentanyl that gets trafficked into this country is taken in by citizens at legal ports of entry, which is not something anybody ever likes to bring up. But the frustrating thing to me, which is that even though Republicans have turned their hawkishness on the border into a very potent electoral strength, to the point where when you turn on ads in solidly blue New York that statewide Democrats are running, statewide Democrats who are expected to win, by the way, by 25 to even 30 points, it's all about stopping crime at the border. But the problem for me is that when you have both of these people dovetailing in this way, and when we talk about the immigration bill, it's important to remember that it was part of a compromise. Republicans would get a very strong immigration bill. Democrats would get money for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And when the immigration bill fell apart, Democrats still got their money. But the only bipartisan thing about the border bill was that a Democrat and an independent helped write it with James Lankford, and it was still chock full of conservative priorities, which is what every single Democrat on the Hill was saying when Republicans spiked it. I fear that with this discussion, we already have one party that has given in to its kind of lesser instincts regarding xenophobia. And when Kamala Harris talks about immigration and highlights her credentials as the Attorney General of a border state who took on transnational gangs. And when she talks about signing the border bill, there's not that same discussion of democratic priorities regarding amnesty or cleaning up the asylum system to fast track applications to unstick the immigration process, because a fast and easy immigration system is actually very good for American workers. It means that citizens don't have to fear getting deported, which means that they can fight for higher wages, for better working conditions, and for better jobs, as opposed to undocumented and residents who are forced to accept substandard wages, substandard working conditions. And so I'm concerned that with the thinning of that distinction in an election where you have two candidates who could not be more far apart is not really setting the stage for what Kamala Harris is trying to run on, which is turning the page. But Walz did miss some opportunities, especially to highlight his own personal background with immigration as the governor of a state that has a very high refugee population.
You know, I've said time and time again on this show, and I think on your show too, Josh, you know, I think Republicans won in the American public's perspective, to Josh's point, on the issue of immigration. I think it's solidified in folks who are not tuned in to politics. I think it's solidified the Democrats are soft on the border. I think it's solidified that Republicans are unreasonable when it comes down to abortion. I grew up in a Republican area, and I've spoken to many Republicans. I've worked with Republicans, and I can tell you a lot of them don't agree with this kind of national abortion ban. A lot of them do believe, you know, in alignment with Governor Walz, mind your own damn business, right? I think that sometimes when we go through these, you know, these performative exercises during the course of the campaign, there's certain images that have been solidified in the American public mind that gives one party an advantage, and all they've got to do is continue to emphasize that. A case in point, I think, is that when Donald Trump repeatedly characterized Biden as senile, he did that since 2019. Democrats didn't counteract that. To this day, I don't think anything's wrong with Biden. Is he not the same as he was in 2016 in terms of the way he can walk and speak? Yeah. I mean, we knew he wasn't a good speaker back in 1987 when he had to drop out that campaign for plagiarism. So I'm just bringing that as a point to say, you know, sometimes when there's a caricature out there like George W. Bush is not smart, or, you know, those kinds of things get solidified in folks' minds. And it's like, no matter what, because it's solidified and because there wasn't a counter narrative to that, it's going to be so much work just to work against that caricature or that characterized position that has been implanted by the opposing side. That's just something I just wanted to throw out. But this debate took place days after Hurricane Helene, wreaked havoc across the southeastern part of the United States. And you had vice presidential hopeful Senator JD Vance pivoting away from questions about Donald Trump's claims that climate change is a hoax, and he gravitated towards an exchange on manufacturing policy instead. He shifted the focus from climate change to manufacturing policy, accused the Biden-Harris administration of not doing enough in terms of manufacturing. How significant is it that climate action is now being debated, not in terms of science denial, but economic competitiveness? Is this a strategic pivot on the part of the Republican Party?
I don't know about strategic pivot, but it was definitely a missed opportunity for two reasons. Number one, because a lot of Republicans in Congress voted against funding FEMA in this budget agreement that averted a government shutdown that Donald Trump was asking for, but also because number two, Project 2025 calls for eliminating FEMA. It calls for eliminating the NOAA, the government organization that monitors and tracks hurricanes and these natural disasters. And it also was a missed opportunity for Tim Walz to point out that Donald Trump ripped up and withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accords, which was a commitment for the US to be a leader on the climate, right? When Trump says America first, America first, America first, but he didn't put America in a position to lead the world on climate change. But I do think it's very good that we're having to discuss climate, and Republicans are being forced to defend their positions on the climate. But it was a very big missed opportunity. Although I do think Walz did okay on climate, especially with a very strong defense of federally owned lands. I think that was another area of missed opportunities.
I feel like missed opportunities is the theme of tonight's panel discussion. And I want to be a little careful here because I'm getting in a little over my skis trying to talk climate policy. But I have observed from the right that I don't know so much presidential candidates are being pushed there by, say, the scientists or Democrats, as much as they are, as this may sound surprising, rank and file members within their own party. Particularly younger Americans on the right are far more likely to be conservationist, environmentalist, are far more likely to be reticent about these messages of climate change being a hoax. That being said, I don't think that means there is national or the potential for national agreement on these issues, because I think oftentimes what the right will bring to it is a free market solution to some of these potential problems. And Nate, I'm no fan of Project 2025, so don't get me wrong there. But as a proud CPA with the Oklahoma State Auditor's Office, while I don't at all think we should disband FEMA, there's a lot of fraud that takes place in FEMA, and I certainly don't mind taking a hard look at possible restructuring to make certain that money is going to the individuals it is intended to help, and not just going to wealthy contractors. Anyhow, little side issue there. I guess the point being, I don't know how much of this is, I think as a nation, we're moving more toward accepting that climate change is real. I think my concern, though, is that a lot of people then jump to, well, therefore we now are all in agreement as to what to do about it. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, hang on. We've still got a massive disagreement between broadly speaking, a collectivist or a free market response to climate change. And I really think that's going to be the argument in the generations to come is, well, what do we do about it?
I think the biggest opportunities the Democrats are missing regarding climate change, again, is to redefine the game. The space that has been left open is to talk about how our activity on climate can be motivated, incentivized through the tax code. Tax credits for initiatives, both large scale and on the individual scale, that move us in the right direction on climate change. That leaves open the door for innovation. It leaves open the door for the lack of the heavy hand of government, but it incentivizes Americans to do things that will help stop the devastating floods, hurricanes, tornadoes that are measurably rising. It's just again, the missed opportunity to redefine the issue as not just the Green New Deal, but the Green New Deal in terms of this is an economic growth opportunity for America.
Nate, Mike, we got to get those missed opportunity sweatshirts issued immediately, because we got to get those shirts. I want that as a quid pro quo for appearing on your podcast, is the missed opportunity sweatshirt. But I think, a lot of this comes down to, I agree with Josh, that the fact that people may be moving more toward the idea that climate change is real and things need to be done to address it, then leads right into the how. What are the mechanics of addressing that problem? So you talked about a tax code change. There are people who believe that the problem is so enormous that there has to be a large governmental response to address climate change, as opposed to incentivizing citizens to do what they do in their communities, maybe 1 or 2 or 18. But the challenge is, and it's kind of a philosophical thing about how do you think the best way to knock the climate change problem down. And I don't know that there's one choice or one solution. So I'm not saying there's got to be a huge government or tax code, but there's got to be a way that people think this thing through to address the many things. The sort of neoliberal notion that NOAA could go away because it can be privatized has been demonstrably proven not to really be the best way to approach things. We're looking at the space program, for example. Private sector convinced the government that the space program needed to be privatized. It isn't working. It can't work because all it turns into is very rich people going on vanity projects to put themselves or their ideas in space. And if the idea is to do research, is to improve the ability of mankind to work in a larger environment called space as opposed to just the Earth, that's much more governmental function than not. But we can have this discussion about so many things that where the notion of privatization is, whether it's prisons, whether it's public education, whether it's healthcare, there's all kinds of things that need to be thought through better than we have done it. Among those things that we have moved away from, dare I say it, centralized government, which I'm not a big fan of, so I'm not promoting that. But the idea is, if you just let the private sector take it over, it'll all get fixed. Doesn't work either.
You know, I've always been fascinated as to why is it that Democrats can't frame climate change in the realm of national security? You know, I had Jonathan Alter, who's coming out with a book coming out on October 22nd called American Reckoning, Donald Trump's Trial and My Own. It sounds like a wonderful must-read page turner. But, you know, he was on my show earlier this week to commemorate Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday. And he said President Carter signed 15 pieces of legislation. And he can, and in the policy work that he did pertaining to climate, there was literally verbatim the precursor for what later became 35 years later the Paris Climate Accords. Of course, the previous administration removed us. Biden put us back in. I've always been fascinated as to why Democrats are more defensive on trying to defend the Green New Deal, and instead of getting into this kind of verbiage of Green New Deal, just talk about it in terms of national security. One of the accusations that I've heard, not just JD Vance, but I've heard Charlie Kirk, I've heard many Republicans on Fox News say, is that during the Donald Trump administration, there were no new wars, that we were in a time of peace and prosperity, that there were, that you know, we were all holding hands and singing together. And, you know, I'm wondering, why is it that Democrats, even on this issue, on this point of contention, why are they pointing to the fact that Trump chose to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria in 2019, which led to a Turkish military invasion against Kurdish forces? Under, you know, that was a war during the Trump administration. Why did they get away with saying, you see, under the Biden-Harris administration, you know, Putin's invading Ukraine, Hamas is attacking Israel. This never would have happened under Trump. And the Democrats just, you know, they're not even arguing that under this president, NATO was stronger than ever before. We've got 2 new members of NATO. That was something that was disappointed Harris didn't bring up in the presidential debate a few weeks back.
Yeah, I generally just think that the Democrats' stance is reactive. I don't really believe that they have a message that they're driving. That one of the things that makes Donald Trump a consequential president and also made Ronald Reagan a consequential president is they changed the conversation across the spectrum of politics. They literally redefined the game. And the Democrats, because they're reactive, don't or can't do that because you have to have a proactive vision that you're committed to, that you can articulate clearly, and that resonates with people in a way that you don't need an MPA or a JD to understand. Blue-collar people can understand the things that Donald Trump says, even when he's lying. Democrats seem to go past people to policies that are amorphous, vague, and reactive. And it's a recipe to, again, just respond to accusations and increasingly false accusations by their opponents.
Yeah, all that's true. But, you know, I've said this before, and it's not politically correct, and it's not, you know, whatever. But the Democrats play an inherently weak hand because 60% of the 60% of white people vote Republican, walking out of bed. I mean, so I mean, it's like, that's the major demographic, or it's at least it's the majority demographic group, or at least a plurality demographic group in the country. And 3 out of 5 of them vote Republican. And, so the Democrats are playing a weak hand just from a demographic standpoint. And from this electoral college weakens the hand even further. Where, Wyoming has, and even the bicameral system, where in the Senate, it's just, it's undemocratic as it can get. I mean, not even the founding fathers could foresee, that a state like Wyoming would get 2 senators, with 700,000 people at max, and California with 40 million people get 2 senators. I mean, so the system is so whacked that against the people's will, so that the Democrats are just playing an inherently weak hand, and then nomenclature is and verbiage and is important, because I noticed Josh said something to the effect that one of the approaches for climate change is a collectivist approach, where it's really just a public approach. It's just public, but that term collectivist, that is it rings of communism and socialism. So I mean, that's in people's minds, and Democrats just haven't figured out a way to simplify the argument. I mean, it's like, what you're talking about is public versus private. That's all you're talking about. But public gets the stain of collectivist. I mean, and that's just an example. But and I don't mean Josh did this purposely, but I mean, I'm just saying that's the way the political rhetoric. That's the way the political rhetoric cookie crumbles, so to speak. So to mix all kind of metaphors.
So this debate was interesting because, unlike the first debate between Harris and Trump, this debate was much more cordial, as we alluded to earlier. And it seemed as if the public didn't know, it wasn't as clear who won the debate among the public. 42% of the debate watchers, according to CBS News, said that Vance won the debate. 41% thought that Walz emerged as the winner. I saw a New York Times article that showed only 8 of the respondents said that Walz won, compared to a much more substantial number for Vance. So Vance, I think, did his job well in appealing as if he was a sane person. A lot of, I think back in 1980 about, reports that the Carter the campaign was celebrating in the White House when Ronald Reagan won the nomination, because the idea was that this was someone that they could portray as so extreme, someone who was so unstable in a time of the Cold War, that there's no way that he could beat President Carter. And of course, on that debate stage, October 20th, 1980, Reagan appeared sane. He appeared reasonable. He appeared as someone that they could support. And I think JD Vance seemed to fulfill that goal up until the point where Walz, towards the end of the debate, looked at him and said, "Who won that debate? Who won the election?" JD Vance says, "I'm not focused. I'm focused on the future. And can you tell me whether Harris censored the January 6th rioters," or something to the effect of that. Now, I want to get your thoughts on that moment in the debate and what it meant, because I'm looking at the numbers as to, those who watched this debate, and as significant and disqualifying to me as that answer was, it doesn't seem like it resonated with people. It still seems like people were still, they fell into this idea that Vance was smooth. Like, smooth was an adjective that was describing Vance tonight. Vance was someone who seemed reasonable. He seemed to be Trump without the bombastic nature.
Yeah, gosh, I have a lot of thoughts. Just trying to keep them straight here. I think possibly one of the greatest zingers we've ever heard in a vice presidential debate, and I'm blanking on his opponent, but when his opponent told Dan Quayle, "Sir, you are no Jack Kennedy," and as a result, nothing.
Lloyd Benson.
Lloyd Benson. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I was sitting here trying to rack my brain. Who was that?
From Texas, where they keep the gate open to keep the wind in Oklahoma.
Yes, exactly. That was an incredible line that in the end meant absolutely nothing. I mean, it's not as if that line got them over the finish line. And I'm not trying to be cynical here in saying this, but from a certain standpoint, barring somebody doing something so insane that it would completely disqualify the ticket in the minds of the most partisan American, it's unlikely this is going to make any difference. And this is not going to be one of those debates we remember years from now. In fact, one of the things I enjoyed about the debate was just how unremarkable it was. I actually got done watching it. It was like, that's the first I remember watching a debate in quite a while where I didn't feel exhausted and a little angry afterwards. I've said this before, I don't like either presidential ticket. I don't agree with much of what they were saying, but it honestly kind of called back some old muscle memories. Like, I forgot what debates were like when they're kind of wonkish. And, we have to actually talk about the issues rather than the dumb thing that guy said and the response to it. So I find it hard to answer the question, who won the debate? I feel like in some very tangible senses, Biden lost the debate to Donald Trump because of the after effect. But I don't think, I think in a sense, both of them were relatively on par sparring partners, if you will. I don't think they harmed their ticket. I just don't know if in the end it really matters.
Yeah, I don't think it matters. I don't think vice presidential debates ever matter. I think they've done nothing really in the history of vice presidential debates. I think that there are a significant number of Trump and Vance supporters who believe the election was stolen to this very day and will not ever change their opinion on that. And I think there are people who aren't going to vote for Vance and Trump who are absolutely convinced that the election wasn't stolen. So I don't think it really moved the needle. I think it's what you hear from those guys, and for the people who support the Kamala Harris, and for the people who support Vance and Trump. Yeah, that's right. Why we're talking about that again? We know you stole it. We got to try to keep you from stealing the next one. So I just don't think it. I don't think it makes any difference.
Well, and I agree with that. And again, I'm going to say it again. The missed opportunity was to look forward to the next election, this coming election, to ask Vance if the same conditions exist, will you concede? Will you tell your people not to riot before the riot begins? I think that's the opportunity that Governor Walz missed on, because it's coming. November and December, I believe, will be trying times in America, and I think the Democrats should be preparing Americans for the lack of stability that Republican politics puts into our governmental system, and to use that. It's not a threat, but it's a reality of instability, to say basically to the American people that Democrats aren't the conservative party, but we are the party of stability in America. And if we go down the road that Trump has for us, we will lose full confidence, not just in our elections, but in our way of life.
That's exactly why I think that Vance won the debate, because you know, what he did, or I think his goal, the goal was to normalize the Trump candidacy. You know, I mean, Harris won the debate, the presidential debate, because she reminded people how unfit this man is for the presidency. You know, and you know, I never heard anything about, you know. So I don't want to pounce on Walz anymore, but I'm just saying that Vance normalized the Trump candidacy to some extent, or to the extent that he did. To the extent that he did, he won the debate. I mean, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, this is a wholly unfit ticket. You know, but you know, these people cannot possibly occupy the White House. But you know, he looked and sounded, you know, like a normal guy, and Walz treated him like as if this was a regular candidacy in a regular election. I mean, a normal, you know, like we were, you know, like we were in 1976 or something. I mean, it was unbelievable. And you know, that's why I'm saying that was Walz's. I mean, that was Vance's job to kind of rehabilitate his running mate and rehabilitate the ticket to some extent, because you know that's the only issue. The only issue really here is in this election is Trump. That's really the only issue. It's not inflation. It's not, you know, it's not foreign policy. It's, are we going to let this guy, you know, who said he wants to be a dictator on day one? He said he wants to be a dictator on day one. You know, why wasn't the word dictator used in the debate? You know, I mean, what happens to a dictator on day two if he doesn't get everything he wants to get done on day one? I mean, it's like, you know, I mean, so, you know, none of that was brought up. So to the extent that this candidacy, I mean, this, you know, this ticket was normalized, Vance won.
And to your point,
I'm actually.
Oh, sorry, Nate. And to your point, Mr. Foster, you know, just real quick, you know, the fact that most presidents don't even have their full cabinet on day one means that they have to rely fully on executive orders. So I'm wondering what those kinds of executive orders would look like. Another thing was, I don't think the fact that Donald Trump quoted Viktor Orban as someone who says, that's someone I want to see in the White House. I don't think Democrats are really hammering that like they should. I think that kind of just got a pass. I mean, pundits talked about it like it was here today, gone tomorrow. I mean, you're pointing to someone who has, you know, made an enemy of his press, who has restricted the freedom of the press in his country, someone who has restricted the rights of his people. I mean, someone who is an authoritarian dictator, and saying that guy wants me to be president. That's what he said. I mean, normally I would try to appear, you know, I'm presenting this in a non-biased way, but I mean, that's literally what the man said. He said, "Look at Viktor Orban."
He's too esoteric. That's just too esoteric. You care about that, but the guy and the lady in Cleveland, Ohio, who's trying to find an apartment to rent and pay groceries every week, they aren't thinking about Viktor Orban. They aren't thinking about what Viktor Orban thinks about the election. It's just way too removed from them, and I think that's why Mr. Walz, Governor Walz, and Ms. Harris don't spend a lot of time talking about that, because what they've got to do is get to people who haven't already made the intellectual jump that I'm going to support you, because there are a group of people, and we're going to sound elitist in this right now. When I say we, I mean me. We're going to sound elitist. There are a bunch of people like the folks on this thing who understand the issues at a level that says Donald Trump cannot be president again because he is unfit for the office. And it doesn't make so much difference to me what his tax policy is or anything else. I'm not ever going to vote for that Yahoo. But there are a bunch of people who don't see it that way, who see it in a much more directly personal to them way. And Viktor Orban isn't part of their discussion. And so I think that when you do that, if you're Governor Walz, you just aren't talking to the people you want to talk to, because they're going to tune you out and say, you don't care about me. You're talking to those eggheads at Harvard.
I'm actually substantively pretty comfortable saying that Walz won on the issues. Like, I liked a lot of his answers on housing, healthcare, things like that. But his job was to highlight that a Trump White House would be that the Trump White House was chaotic, and a second Trump administration would be even more so. That Trump without guardrails would be incredibly extreme. That Trump and Vance are untrustworthy, and it's kind of, well, for one, he, again, is not a comfortable debater, but it's also kind of clear that in his preparation, he was moved away from what made him such a compelling vice presidential pick in the first place, which is how he completely reframed the debate away from Donald Trump as a threat to the foundations of our constitutional republic to these guys are plain old weird because who's asking for bathroom bills and who's asking for national abortion bans? Not most people. And moving away from that into a kind of higher concept, into the collegiality of a bygone era, is what allowed Vance to have a pretty strong debate up until that last portion where they talked about January 6th. And to your point, Professor Foster, there was a bit of that fruit about accepting the results of the election when Vance asked, when Walz asked Vance straight up, "Are you going to honor democracy or are you going to honor Trump?" But substantively, to me, anytime you can get a Republican to play defense on January 6th, you're in a pretty strong position. And I think that's what pulled Walz ahead, not necessarily ahead, but into more of a position where people could say this debate was a draw. And I think he got that quotable when he talked about January 6th and saying, did Donald Trump win in 2020, yes or no? But, like everyone has agreed, vice presidential debates don't really matter unless you've done something that's so horribly disastrous to the top of your ticket that it ends the race immediately. So this isn't really going to hurt either campaign. I don't think it's necessarily going to help either campaign very much either. But Vance had a much better performance simply style-wise, because debates are style and substance, and stylistically Vance came off much. He came off like a normal person, which is not an easy thing for him to do, but he managed it anyway because Walz let him get away with it.
And I just want to, as we're wrapping up, I do think these debates are performative, they're performative events. You go back to 1960. There's a reason why those who were tuning in by radio thought Nixon won. Those who were watching on television thought Jack Kennedy won. I mean, it was all about how Jack Kennedy portrayed himself. He was coming out of Los Angeles. He had a little tan. He looked confident. He looked like he was ready to be in a movie. Nixon had asked an aide to buy this, I forgot what they called it, with makeup to kind of cover up.
Pancake makeup.
To cover up his 5 o'clock shadow. And he started to sweat with the studio lights on him. And he looked squirmish. He looked unsure, right? So visually, there was a message both candidates were giving. And visually, here in 2024, it looked like JD Vance was Trump without the chaos. Now, we disputed that already, but as we're wrapping up, what's also interesting is that right after this debate, special counsel Jack Smith, who won't get a chance to bring his best criminal case against Donald Trump to trial before the 2024 election, and if Trump wins, he probably won't ever get that chance. But yesterday, Wednesday, the public got its most complete look at the evidence Smith has amassed to try to prove that former President Trump orchestrated criminal conspiracies as he sought to overturn his loss 4 years ago in a 165-page legal brief unsealed by a federal judge. The special counsel, Jack Smith, fleshed out detailed evidence he would use against Trump at trial if the case ever makes it that far. He also presented his arguments for why Trump is not immune from the charges, despite the Supreme Court's ruling this summer about presidential immunity that granted presidents broad immunity for official acts. With mounting legal challenges against Trump, do you think voters on either side are becoming desensitized to these revelations, or is there still room for a game-changing moment?
Too late. I mean, too late on the legal front from my perspective. It's too late. It's this was the worst thing Joe Biden ever did was appoint Merrick Garland as Attorney General. That's his most egregious mistake. There's no reason on earth that this took 4 years. That we're here 4 years later. There's no reason. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. But Merrick Garland, just slow walked. The obvious. What was public knowledge, and what the January 6th committee, they did the heavy lifting. I mean, there was no reason for this to take this long. There's no, this should have been cooking from since January 22nd or whenever the Attorney General was confirmed. In 2021. So so it's too late. It's too late.
Yeah, well, and just to echo that, this is not the way the country is supposed to work. When someone commits what is thought to be a crime that is witnessed by tens of millions of people, a crime against the country, an insurrection against the country, that's a legal emergency that seems to me, and I'm not an attorney, but it seems that the pace of these prosecutions did not reflect the constitutional emergency that this was against our republic. And the whole thing, now we're getting to vote, basically. Do you care about January 6th? Do you think it's okay? That's not the way it's supposed to work. This is supposed to be adjudicated in courts, not by the popular or electoral vote.
Except it's working the way it's. See, there's no way to say, it's like proving a negative. There's no way to know that trying the first president in the history of the United States for crimes on January 6th or whatever was ever going to have any different result. That the Supreme Court was ever going to make the same ruling that they made in June. There's no way to know that wouldn't have happened if Merrick Garland had started 15 seconds after he took the oath of office as Attorney General. There's just no way to know that. This is such an odd duck. And Jack Smith moved very quickly after he was appointed. I agree. But it was a long time before he was appointed. I agree. But there's no way to know that you wouldn't be in the exact same place we are now if Jack Smith had started in January of 2020, because this is so odd. There are clearly legal differences of opinion. There will be juror differences of opinion. It's a heavy lift. Look, I've represented prominent people. It's difficult for jurors to convict prominent people. Okay, it's not impossible, but it's difficult because their prominence skews the system. The American justice system is not fair. It is not balanced. Rich people get away with stuff that poor people will never get away with. Okay, and that's just the way it works. It is an imperfect system. We do a lot to make it work better, but it is imperfect. And rich people get an advantage because they're rich. They get better lawyers in general, and they get the bias of being a prominent person that couldn't possibly have done something wrong. So I don't know that that we're at really a different place than we would have been otherwise. Now, my personal opinion, he ought to have been tried and convicted. I would vote to convict him, but I would never get on a jury because I'd say that and they'd throw me off the jury pool. But I don't know that you can get a guy who is as famous as he was president of the United States, put him in a box and assure yourself you're going to convict him. And the worst thing you could do as a prosecutor is try him and have him walk out of the courtroom not guilty.
Yeah, and I think that I think it's helpful to remember, Fred, and I agree with you. This is, I think the words you used were unusual, or this is rather unprecedented. We've never had this in the nation.
Which is a good thing.
It's a wonderful thing, and it's something that I think we as Americans have taken for granted, and we can be very proud of hundreds of years of not having to face these. What do you do when a former president is run through this legal gauntlet? I think it's worth highlighting. It should have never gotten this far, because where the failures where the failure began was not with Merrick Garland. It wasn't with the Biden administration. It was really with Congress. It was with Congress after January 6th. There is a mechanism in the United States Constitution for dealing with this. It's impeachment and removal from office. And the U.S. Congress, specifically the Republican Party, simply chose not to do its job. Now, there are plenty of Republicans that would have never voted for that, but you have your Mitch McConnells who probably would have and probably could have strong-armed many Republicans, and certainly could have given cover for many Republicans, and made a very selfish and ultimately poor calculation. Well, what possible harm could there be in just letting this guy right into the sunset? Surely he would never run for president again. Surely no one would ever support this. I mean, the way the nation felt on January 7th, we even had Lindsey Graham saying, "That's it, I'm off the Trump train." That didn't age well, and I think this is ample evidence of when the U.S. Congress does not do its job, it throws it back on a system, the judicial system, which is ill-equipped to truly handle this. Because this is an executive. I mean, we certainly, and I'm not suggesting the way that the justice system is going about this, but we do not want to get into a world in which former presidents are prosecuted by the opposing party, because that way lies madness. And the way you stop that is you have an active, effective legislative system that reasserts their role in protecting the Constitution and saying there is no place for a person who's tried to overthrow an election, and we will not stand for this.
I'm sorry, I have to disagree. The insurrection was an attack on the Capitol of the United States. There were rioters running through the halls of the Capitol of the United States.
And those people have been convicted.
Those people, but the people who conspired to make that happen have not been to trial yet. And that does not reflect the emergency, that this is not just some political revenge kind of thing. This is something that, as you said, Lindsey Graham said, "I'm off the train."
And then he got back on the train.
Right, because the legal pursuit, separate from what Congress did not reflect the emergency that this was on our country. My fear is that we are going to have another insurrection should Donald Trump not take office this coming January, because insurrections have been normalized.
I don't disagree with you, but I think Josh is absolutely right. The failure was the Congress of the United States not impeaching that jackass and preventing him from being able to run for office again. They didn't have the political will. The criminal justice system of the United States of America is not designed to deal with this. And that's why it's having such a hard time getting this guy in a box where he can fit, where he belongs. So I am not defending him in any way, shape, fashion, or form. But what I'm saying is this is so irregular that the system has never been built to deal with someone like Donald Trump who does not play by any of the normative rules. And the system has a difficult time coping with that. The way he should have been dealt with in terms of the system was for it to have a president of the United States who commits a high crime and misdemeanor that was watched by 10 million people on television and many members of Congress who were the victims of it, to be impeached by the Congress of the United States, but they didn't have the political will to do it. And then you're then left with trying to have the criminal justice system that is not designed to prosecute a president of the United States for committing this insurrection, which I will agree with you, I think it was, for being the architect, the leading conspirator of an insurrection. The individuals who committed the acts, who ran around with weapons and broke stuff, yeah, that's easy to prosecute. That kind of crime happens all the time. We can convict those people every day. But what you can't convict is the guy at the top of the conspiracy pyramid who put this thing in motion indirectly, directly, however way you want to look at it, and get him in a box. And that's the challenge that the criminal justice system has. Now, look, I think Merrick Garland has been a weak attorney general on this issue. So I am not a Merrick Garland fan, and he's a friend of mine. So I've told Merrick this. But Merrick's reluctance was born out of his reality as a judge and a lawyer for a long time. This case is going to be really hard to prosecute. And is the Republic better served by not prosecuting this guy and maybe keeping him from being elected ever again, or do we try him, lose, and have him turned into a demigod? And that was, I think, Merrick's calculation. Now, I don't agree with it. I wouldn't have done it that way, but I think that was his calculation. And I don't think it's completely out of order. I think it's wrong, but I don't think it's just a completely fabricated calculation.
And again, respectfully, I think that approach by Merrick Garland reflects the same approach by James Comey. They're thinking about politics instead of thinking about just doing the job. And just doing the job is what we're asking them to do. I mean, Lady Justice wears a blindfold. So the hell with the politics. Just do the job. Prosecute the crime. I know that sounds naive, but that's where the credibility that they are so dearly trying to protect comes from, is just going straight to the issue and not doing political calculations about who this person is. Look at what the person did.
Who he is, Donald Trump, is who he is as a former president of the United States.
I understand.
And I don't disagree. Look, I say to people all the time, when it's more important to keep the job than to do the job, it's time to get a different job. Okay, I believe that. But what I'm saying to you is, this has never happened in the history of the United States. And you dump this in the Attorney General's lap, and he's got to figure out what to do. And the Attorney General is, remarkably enough, a political appointee. He's not just some smart lawyer who took a civil service test and wound up getting the highest grade and got to be the Attorney General. He's a political appointee. He's a political creature.
Well, this are you saying, Professor Cook, that had Jack Smith been appointed 18 months before he was appointed, that we would still be in the same place we are now?
No. I'm saying you don't know that it would be, because Donald Trump would have litigated it, and you may have gotten some of the same results that you got earlier by the various courts that he appealed to. I don't know that it would have been different.
But that's the whole point. It would have been earlier. It would have been earlier. That's the whole point.
But you're missing my point. It would have been earlier, and he still wouldn't have been in trial. Because do you seriously believe that after Judge Chutkan does what she does with Jack Smith's brief that was filed the other day, that this isn't going to go back to the Supreme Court again? We're going to spend it would not have come to conclusion within the 4 years of Joe Biden's term. It just wouldn't have. No, I agree with you. I don't know that, but I'm saying if the Donald Trump that exists now existed then and litigated every nook and cranny that he could, it's very likely to have taken 4 years anyway. I don't know that, but yeah, I don't find that hard to believe at all.
I find it hard to believe because somehow he got convicted in New York. It didn't take that long. I mean,
he got convicted in New York on what?
34 charges, felony charges.
He got convicted in New York in a system that's different than the federal system, where the appeal process is a lot shorter. I agree with you. Yeah. It's longer in the federal system when the judges behave the way they did. The Supreme Court consciously delayed this case's decision. They did it on purpose. They can decide a case in 15 minutes if they want to. They chose not to in this case. Now, I don't know that they would or would not have done that. That's why I keep saying we don't know that we'd be in a different place. I'm not guaranteeing that we would have been. We just don't know.
But the Attorney General's job was to commence proceedings, not to delay proceedings. You know, I mean, that's the criticism. That's the criticism. You know,
but you can say that about most any case. You can say it about any case. If you're
this isn't most any case, Doc.
No, you can say that about most any case because the facts of the case determine when it goes to trial. Okay. And sometimes the facts take longer to develop than other times. You're always making decisions about when to pull the trigger. That always happens.
The impeachment managers started to establish the facts of the case.
You're talking about the Congress.
Real soon.
You're talking about a whole different level of proof between the Congress of the United States and a criminal prosecution in a U.S. court. Two different levels of proof.
Okay, man. I mean, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I'm sorry.
But there's nothing to buy. It is. That's just real. In a U.S. court, you have to find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't have to do that in the Congress.
His investigations sooner than he did. That's inexcusable. You know, I mean, the reason he didn't was what?
Because he believed that the prosecution of a former president of the United States was so problematic that he was not willing to jump out and prosecute him and lose, as opposed to let it all just go away.
Job. That is not doing his job. That's blatant not doing your job.
No, his job is to make that decision. You don't have to like his decision, but his job is to make the decision to prosecute or not.
But he ended up making a decision to prosecute him.
That's right, because he changed his mind. But his job is to make the decision. Because you disagree with the decision doesn't mean he didn't make a decision.
So he made a decision to prosecute him. And we're assuming
ultimately he made a decision to prosecute after making an initial decision not to prosecute. Absolutely.
Well, he never said that. He never said that. You must know something that we don't know, because he never said that he's not going to prosecute him. He never said that.
I do have to come in here because it wasn't Garland who made the decision to prosecute. He took the decision out of his own hands by passing it over to Jack Smith. After waiting for so long to
Jack Smith wouldn't have anything to do with it unless Merrick appointed him. Merrick made
it's Jack Smith who ultimately made the decision to charge.
That the prosecution was going to go forward and he wasn't going to make it. That's what he did.
Well, the prosecution was okay. The prosecution was going to go forward.
Say again.
Okay, he made the decision that the prosecution was going to go forward. He never announced.
His job was to prosecute.
I know, but he never announced. My point is, Merrick Garland never said, never intimated, never hinted, never insinuated that he was not going to prosecute.
And prosecutors don't do that. You don't have a public announcement that I'm not going to prosecute somebody. No, you don't. Because you may find out a fact that says I've got to prosecute, which is what happened to Merrick Garland.
He didn't discover anything.
Yes, he did. He was in a box created by the congressional inquiry that he couldn't get out of at a point.
Which was doing his job. Well, they were doing his job.
They were doing their job. Look, it is a fact that the Department of Justice had an investigation ongoing parallel to the congressional investigation. It was being slow walked. There's no question about that in my mind.
That's inexcusable.
Again, you don't like the decision.
That's inexcusable. Well, you haven't given us an excuse for it. Other than
it's Merrick Garland's job is to make a decision to prosecute or not. I don't have to like every prosecutor.
But he didn't make a decision not to prosecute. He didn't make a decision not to prosecute. That's my point. He did not make a decision not to prosecute. He slow walked it. He didn't make a decision not to prosecute.
You see,
look, for me, either way, I had a very hard time
on you, but he did make a decision not to prosecute, which is why he was slow walking it. He wanted to go.
It was unethical. It was unethical of him then. It was unethical. Straight up.
For me, either way, I had a very hard time thinking that Trump was going to go to jail anyway. For me, my whole position was I'm going to believe Trump is going to prison when I see Trump getting loaded into a paddy wagon and getting, dropped off at a federal prison. not necessarily because of Merrick Garland's inaction, although that was very infuriating to watch, but simply because the only institution that has ever held Trump to account was the voters. It was the voters in 2020 who sent Trump packing. It wasn't Congress, even though Nancy Pelosi certainly not for a lack of trying, because Nancy Pelosi did bring 2 impeachments against Trump that ultimately went nowhere, but simply because the voters are the only ones who've ever held Trump to account. Not Republican Party leadership, who let him do whatever he wanted, and then after the fact said that was bad. Not Mitch McConnell, who whipped Republicans against voting for impeachment, who whipped Republicans to try to dismiss the second impeachment trial in the first place, and then after it was over, stood up and said Trump bears 100% responsibility for what happened on January 6th. It wasn't Republican voters who nominated the guy 3 times. It was Democratic voters largely and the electorate at large who said, enough is enough, this guy cannot stay in office. Unfortunately, we do have a Supreme Court that very much wants to see him back in office and slow-walked all the legal questions around him. We had Trump having an extra defense attorney in Eileen Cannon, who slow-walked the prosecution of him there in what was arguably the strongest case, because he was not president when he took those documents. He held on to them anyway and then had them, strewn about his house. But once again, it's going to be the voters who are going to decide, is Trump ever going to be held to account in a court of law and by a jury of his peers, if you can even have a jury of peers of a former president. And if we want what Jack Smith has revealed in his filing to matter, it's up to Democratic candidates to make that case, and it's up to people who care about the issues to talk about it in their communities. I do a lot of voter outreach. I can talk on the phone and text strangers all I want, but they can tune me out because I'm just a random person over the airwaves. But it's person-to-person, peer-to-peer communication that has the biggest impact. So if you think Trump should not be in office, what are you willing to do about it? How are you going to make that case to your friends to say, this is someone who, when he found out his vice president was in danger, said, so what? This is someone whose team was saying, we need them to riot, so do whatever it takes to get them to riot. This is someone who knew people were crowding around the Capitol with weapons and said, well, they're not here to hurt me, so what do I care? It's up to Democrats to make that case on the airwave, and it's up to the base and to be the surrogates and make that a relevant issue in people's minds. Because like you said, Josh, I remember what it was like on January 7th for everyone to stand up and say this was inexcusable and shouldn't happen again. And I remember watching that will to hold Trump to account fall apart. And not just on the Republican side either. There were Democrats who refused to call up witnesses in the second impeachment because Valentine's Day was coming up and Chris Coons wanted to go home.
Well, gentlemen,
we seem to forget that he New York State held him to account. I mean, and he had been found to be civilly liable for raping somebody or sexually abusing them. He had been civilly found for fraud.
Before it was president. But there is a track record for holding an American president civilly liable. That's different than convicting him in a criminal case.
My point on that was proceedings should have, a prosecutorial proceeding should have started.
And how long did they investigate Bill Clinton before they wound up sanctioning him? That was over 2 terms. It never moves fast with the president. It never does.
Not my point. My point is the proceeding should have commenced immediately. That's my point. That's the point. That's my only point, Doc. There was no excuse for him not to.
But that point doesn't get you anywhere because you still
yes, it
don't.
Does.
No. Because you are assuming that because you started in January, it would be concluded before now. And that we don't know.
We don't know that.
We don't know that, and that's what I'm saying to you. You don't know.
Yeah, but we do know it was slow walked. There's no excuse for it to be.
I believe it was slow walk. Yeah.
Come on, man. Come on.
No,
of course you do. Of course you do.
I believe it was slow walk. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that is inexcusable. That's my point.
you okay? You think it's unexcusable, and you get a chance to vote against the president who appointed Merrick Garland.
Well, I can't do that. I don't even have that option.
What do we do with your inexcusability?
You complain about it. Yeah,
okay, beyond that, you do what Nate says. You find a way to convince people that this person is unfit to be president and should never sit in that chair again.
My problem is not that. My problem is that the people who are presently in the chair delayed justice purposefully.
Okay, so what do you do about that?
Hold them accountable for slow walking this because of their political calculations. If I want political calculations, I'll elect somebody from the Democratic National Committee, or I'll vote for somebody from the Democratic National Committee to be the Attorney General. But when I have an Attorney General,
because the Constitution says who gets to be the Attorney General appointing authority. It's not the Democratic National Committee.
No, I'm saying I would ask the politicians that I elect to nominate somebody from the Democratic National Committee to be the Attorney General.
But that doesn't make any sense because the president decides who that it is. You can say that. You can send the president letters all you want.
I'm being facetious.
No, I'm saying that. I'm just saying, where does it get you?
I don't want my politicians putting people in office in the Attorney General's office who will purposely slow walk things for political purposes instead of just a straight pursuit of justice. So I'll hold anybody accountable.
Straight pursuit of justice. You know that, of course, right?
Say again, please.
There's no such thing as a straight pursuit of justice, because while Lady Liberty is blind, no human who's ever sat in one of those chairs is blind. They all have biases.
I yield.
They all do.
I yield. Yeah.
They all do.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. It is the best system of a whole bunch of imperfect systems, but it is clearly imperfect.
Yeah, I'm just deeply troubled that the bias was to delay the pursuit of justice when we had an attack literally on the capital of our government. That is not like anything else that's ever happened. And it demanded a response like nothing that ever happened before.
I don't disagree with you, but my point is, what are you going to do about it because somebody didn't do what you wanted?
Well, thankfully, thankfully, and I will say this, thankfully, the guy who appointed him will not be in office in January.
He's been
thankfully, because like I said, that's my only criticism. I mean, I didn't want Biden. Mike knows this. I didn't want Biden to be the nominee anyway, because I anticipated what happened on June 27th. I could see that coming. So, but my point is, my only criticism of him as president is the appointment of Merrick Garland. And I think history will prove that if this dude gets if this dude gets back in office,
right,
Merrick Garland will go down in history as the biggest failure as Attorney General of all time. I mean, history will not treat this dude well.
But if Donald John Trump gets elected again, it will be because 70 million citizens or plus voted for his dumb ass. That's not Merrick Garland's fault.
Yeah, okay. That's two things can be true at the same time.
Yes, you're true. You're correct.
Well, gentlemen, I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. And for the record, I'm not thankful Biden won't be president on January the 20th. Probably one of the few young people who was gung-ho for Biden, but be that as it may, we had that discussion. You could go back at the previous episode for that one. But I just want to thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. When I saw the folks coming on tonight, I just knew this was going to be a dynamic discussion, and I was completely right. Professor Cook, thanks for being back on.
I was double teamed by the Foster brothers. I want to tag out. I want to get somebody else to come in the ring.
Love you, Doc. Love you, man.
Oh, man, it's great talking to you. I love you.
Much respect, man. Much respect.
No.
But you held your own, Professor. Glad to see it. And Josh, I mean, you added so much dynamic contributions to this discussion. I'm still thankful for you. And again, I want to put a plug in for your podcast, the Saving Elephants podcast. Wonderful discussion. And you recently had an episode, Vice Baby was the episode title. You were also going over a post-debate analysis with the vice presidential candidates. I want to encourage folks to take a look at that one. Professor Foster, thank you so much for making time. Mr. Stephen Foster, thank you so much. Nate, I'm always appreciative to you. With that being said, that's going to go ahead and conclude tonight's episode of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.